let's talk again to Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Lots of other topics I want to cover other than these two crucial topics, the Defence Review and blasphemy laws, and we'll get onto those. But in terms of the Defence Review, we spoke to Liam Fox, former Defence Secretary, and he raised some interesting points about how we're actually going to get to this 2.5% of GDP spending in 2027 and this 3% ambition, about whether we're going to probably be changing the definition of what counts as defence spending, or the Chagos deal and the multi-billion pound cost of surrendering territory, which includes a major military base, be included, and other things as well. And in reality, a lot of this is kind of meaningless, because we shouldn't be talking about the cost, should we? We should be talking about what do we need to defend our country and indeed fulfil our commitments under the NATO treaty to our allies, given the threats from Russia and indeed from China and elsewhere. What do we need? And then fund it, because it shouldn't be an optional extra, should it?
No, absolutely. I mean, you should work out what you think is necessary to defend the nation and then work back from that standpoint, rather than say this is what currently the spreadsheets will allow for, and this is what currently we can pretty confidently say will be a target that we've got some chance of hitting, and therefore that's what the target is going to be. But this is Whitehall brain, this is Treasury brain, this is bean counters, technocracy, this is how politics works. And I think it's just so fascinating that even at a time where rhetorically they feel the need to make the point that the world has changed.
It was all very strong rhetorically yesterday.
All that stuff. They still revert back to the old ways, and they still revert back to...
Computer says no.
Computer says no, and also we couldn't possibly think about trying to free up some money from, say, all the funds that are being just poured down the sink of net zero. It never kind of follows on from the more immediate.
And again, you need a strong economy to have a strong military. We can't have a strong economy with very expensive energy costs. That is a result of net zero policy. We can't have reliable and secure energy, which is absolutely, certainly electricity is absolutely vital in the event of any war. If Russia can cut cables from Norway, but it's all right. We're getting our electricity from Norway. Like, cut, done. No, we're not. No. I mean, no, we're not. And also, in the event of energy shortages, you think Norway's going to be giving their spare electricity to us as opposed to keeping it for themselves? And
you still need some vestige of an industrial base if you want to rearm, which is something that we're
to build ships and planes and.
I mean, this is the thing. A few weeks ago, they could be pretty blasé about the fact that we're losing our last few remaining blast furnaces and replacing them with these nowhere near good enough arc furnaces, these kind of green alternatives.
Which only, by the way, they can't build virgin steel,
which is essential to all kinds of different weaponry that you might be building. And yet, a few weeks later, they say it's absolutely desperately important that we rearm and we're put on a war footing. It doesn't make any sense. It's a failure
of joined-up government, isn't it? And again, I mean, Liam Fox mentioned, and again, it is totally true. Well, I feel very sure, drop the net zero, that's a huge extra cost, and it makes us insecure, and it puts us at risk in every possible way. And we saw what happened in Portugal and Spain. I mean, come on, wake up, everybody. But welfare, we have got to get on top of the welfare, and that's for the moral good of the people and the health of the people who are currently languishing on welfare, who don't need to be. It is simply not possible that we have a uniquely sickly, mentally ill, disabled population compared to any other Western country as a result of COVID or anything else. It is simply not feasible, logically, that, isn't it miraculous how COVID hit us so much harder? So, all of our young people, are mentally ill. I mean, I'm sorry, it's a load of nonsense. The best thing for an awful lot of people who are currently languishing on some sort of incapacity or sickness benefit of some sort should actually be getting back into work, having a structure to their day, earning their own money, self-esteem, self-respect. But also, we can't afford to pay for you, and certainly not for a lifetime. And especially the young people, they're going to be on benefits forever. I don't want to pay for it. I refuse to pay for it. We've got this idea about getting more people in the military. Well, there you go. Get a job or you're in the military. Done. I mean, I think we need to be a bit more hardcore, and I don't think this government, or indeed the last government, are willing to make enough of the tough choices and to cope with, you're going to get a load of headlines on the BBC where you're going to have someone who's crying about how awful it is now, they can't cope. Yeah, and there are going to be sob stories, there always are. And there are going to be cases you get wrong. But fundamentally, we need to get all our people back to work.
Oh, no, absolutely. And it's a huge crisis for the people who are caught up in that system, all those perverse incentives, entire communities, entire families in some cases, who are kind of plagued by joblessness. And, whilst there's obviously always personal responsibility in there, there's also a hell of a lot of perverse incentives, which the system has been allowed to maintain. It gets covered up by imported cheap labour and all the rest of it. We know all of this. And it's because these things are difficult to deal with that politicians shy away from them.
Yeah.
And but now surely is the point in which the rubber hits the road on this front, but also many more, given there's so much. This what I think what a lot of people are frustrated about is the fact that it feels like the fundamental responsibilities of government are being neglected. Meanwhile, they're chasing absurd policies like net zero, defence, making sure people who commit crimes are
non-crime hated
locked up. You go after the speech criminals, not the shoplifters.
Disposable vapes,
everything.
They're constantly. It's all the minutiae, and just let's control the small number of people who still obey the law and ignore everybody else. I mean, that does feel like. Well, look, and that comes into our next story. What I'm asking you about this morning about this man. This is Hamid Choskin. I understand his name is pronounced. He's an asylum seeker from Turkey. He's been imprisoned in Turkey. He's an atheist. He has campaigned in Turkey and since here in Britain against what he calls the Islamification of Turkish, life, which has undoubtedly happened under Erdogan. It's something he's very much been pushing, and he basically decided to. And he's done it before, and he says he's going to do it again, to burn a copy of the Quran, his own book. He didn't steal someone else. He burned a copy of the Quran outside the Turkish embassy, not outside a mosque. Not that should legally make any difference, although I think a lot of people would feel differently about it, whilst shouting F Islam, saying Islam is the religion of terrorism. He was initially arrested under a different law, which basically the judge had to kind of throw out because it was basically so blatantly attempting to arrest him as under blasphemy law. But he's been convicted yesterday, fined £240 for, to all intents and purposes, blasphemy. Just read out what his conviction was for. Disorderly behaviour within the hearing or sight of a person likely to be caused harassment, alarm or distress, motivated by hostility towards members of a religious group, namely followers of Islam. This was a breach of the Crime and Disorder Act 1998 and the Public Order Act 1986. But the crucial point that was made by the district judge, John McGarver, who should hang his head in shame, is that the proof for him, and he actually said this in court, that his proof for him, the proof of his guilt, was that the conduct was disorderly, is no better illustrated by the fact that it led to serious public disorder involving him being assaulted by two different people. You've written a fantastic piece for Spiked about this, Tom Slater. Explain what actually happened in this incident.
And this boggles the mind, doesn't it? So you have Hamid Choskin, he's doing this protest outside the Turkish consulate, he's burning the Quran, he's saying F Islam and so on, all the details people may well have read about. It sparks this response. There's a man who's in a building nearby, comes out, starts to remonstrate with him, goes away, comes back with a knife, knocks Choskin to the floor, slashes at him and so on. You also have a delivery rider who's going past who kicks Choskin while he's on the floor. And in the ruling itself, in the judgment itself, I should say, the judge makes abundantly clear that precisely because he was attacked, precisely because these two men were so offended by what he was doing that they decided to be physically violent towards him, that proves that he was being disorderly under the Crime and Disorder Act.
But he was causing such offences. But here's the thing.
I've made the point in the piece that he was lucky he wasn't wearing a short skirt as well. I mean, is that the kind of victim-blaming argument that is now acceptable?
I mean, yes, clearly in this case. But here's the thing. So if someone burns a book, whether it's, as mentioned earlier, J. Cooper or a Harry Potter book, or the Bible, for instance, and no one attacks you with a knife, bearing in mind that the man who is alleged to have attacked him with a knife has denied carrying a knife. There is a criminal prosecution that's going through. They're not allowed to know his name. I don't know why we shouldn't be allowed to know the name of the man who's been charged with that crime. I think that's quite bizarre. But in this bizarre situation, if someone burnt a Bible and no one was actually offended enough to physically assault the person who was burning the Bible, by definition that wasn't a cause of disorderly behaviour, and therefore you wouldn't be prosecuted for it. I'm of the view that we should test this out, because it seems to me if the only book that you're not allowed to burn in this country is the Quran, we do have a blasphemy law in this country, abolished 17 years ago, hadn't been used, the blasphemy laws hadn't been used to prosecute anyone for 30 years before they were abolished in 2008. But we clearly have a blasphemy law, but only for one religion. And the reason why we have an unofficial de facto blasphemy law for that one religion is because some, not all, no one is saying all, some adherents to Islam, those who follow the Islamist ideology, the Safist, incredibly violent, autocratic ideology, they believe that a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad, a burning of a Quran, desecration of the book in any way, even just the scuffing of it by a schoolboy in Wakefield, the showing of a Quran, of Prophet Muhammad's picture, a cartoon of him to schoolboys at a grammar school in Batley, that is so outrageous, is so blasphemous that should be punished by death, because that is what those people believe. Now, the reality is, other people in other parts of the world, in Europe included, have actually faced death for showing, burning the Quran or other acts perceived by some to be. But our politicians and our police appear to be too afraid to stand up to this. Now, as far as I'm aware, no prosecution of anyone involved in the death threats to the Batley Grammar School teacher still in hiding. No prosecution of anyone who made death threats to the family and the child involved in the Wakefield case, where the mum went and begged for her family's life at a mosque with a senior police officer next to her, wearing a little shroud. I mean, so she should have to spend the rest of her life living with her son, living in hiding. Why are there no prosecutions of this? Why are the people who are threatening and using violence not being prosecuted, but the people who are apparently so so offensive doing these things being prosecuted and getting criminal records? I
mean, it's that age-old thing, isn't it, about actually going after the bad guys. A small number of people can do an awful lot of damage if they're allowed to get away with it, and that's the perfect example that we've seen here. There's been this growing kind of anti-blasphemy movement, which there's organisations, there's people who go and preach in mosques about this. It's largely
there are Labour
groups.
MPs calling for it.
Absolutely, and there are many groups from the subcontinent, particularly Pakistan, who are campaigning in this country and pushing for this. People have been ignoring this, as you say, people who have been engaging in threats, who are issuing these things over, idiots issuing this stuff over Facebook and social media. It wouldn't be that hard to track these people down. And then you look, going back to the Choskin case and the judgment. You can look at that judgment in two different ways, both of which are kind of as bad as each other. On the one hand, is it suggesting that if you say something that offends someone so much that they try to stab you, it's a criminal offence in and of itself. I mean, we've heard the heckler's veto, it's like the stabber's veto. Is that a good precedent to set? Or are we saying, and I suspect that if he stood outside of a church or of anywhere else and burnt a copy of the Bible, and for some reason there was someone in the area so incensed by this that they assaulted him, I wouldn't have thought this case would actually have got to court. I think they would have gone after the person who tried to assault him, and that would have been that. I think there's cases of judges and prosecutors who are mangling our laws to this end because they think this is a way to keep the peace. It's not. It's the opposite. It's not a way. It fuels intolerance. It will make everything worse.
Absolutely, and it's giving in to the mob, and that's what it is. And the only reason, I mean, I would like to demonstrate my solidarity. The right people. I wouldn't want to, I don't want to burn any book. Genuinely, the worst book in the world I wouldn't want to burn. But I'd also, as an atheist, I wouldn't want to offend people who have religious beliefs by burning their sacred texts. But I think the right to freedom of speech and freedom of protest is so great that would be worth doing. Apart from the fact that I don't want me and my family to spend the rest of our lives in hiding. And that, as you say, that is a violent veto that only one religion has in this country. We have a blasphemy law by the back door, and it only involves one religion. What do we do about that, though? Because Kemi Bade not speaking up on it, but this happened under Tory watches before. We know the Labour government ain't going to do anything about it. They are completely running scared from what they think of as Muslim leaders in this country, community leaders, self-appointed, by the way. The 5 Gaza MPs for Gaza who were elected at the last election. What are we going to do about it? Because this is going to stir up a lot of, should we say, community tensions that they're so worried about, but it's also putting our fundamental freedoms at risk. And you need to be intolerant of intolerance in order to live in a tolerant society.
And we've got to stop capitulating to this, because if there is anyone who wants to go out and launch a campaign or give a speech or whatever saying that I think we should have a blasphemy law that covers Islam, that's entirely their right. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are issuing death threats. We're talking about people who are organising to kill people. We're talking about campaigns which are very clearly trying to intimidate and menace and harass anyone if they dare step out of line. This is something that the criminal law could already take an interest in if they chose to, and they're not. So I think that's definitely the first step, is not acquiescing to these people out of fear of what message it might send. The message we do want to send is that this is not tolerated here, this kind of violent
I have absolutely no faith in our politicians, our police or the Crown Prosecution Service that they will deal with this. And I have a horrible feeling an awful lot of people are going to think they're going to have to take it into their own hands, and that way disaster lies. But don't say you weren't warned. But here we are. I don't know how long people are willing to put up with this. and why they should put up with this. Again, if you want to live in a country where you can't blaspheme against any particular book, there are plenty of countries you can go and live in. Not ours. Not ours. We're supposed to have protection here. That said, an awful lot of the Scandinavian countries that have stood very firm on this, they're toppling like dominoes on this as well. Let me also talk about Maline Macan. It is extraordinary. She would be 22 years old now, Maline Macan. It was when she went missing, believed abducted in Praia da Luz in Portugal all those years ago with her parents on holiday and out at a restaurant. I'm still, to this day, I do not understand how any parent could leave their almost 4-year-olds and 2 babies in a room on their own on the other side of a hotel while they go and get drunk. Sorry, I've always thought that was an insane, really bad decision of theirs, but I still wouldn't wish what happened to them on anyone. But they've searched for her. It's very, very clear now the search for her is very much a search for her body, not for her alive. But the German authorities are absolutely convinced this man, Christian Bruckner, is guilty of her abduction, rape and murder, or abuse and murder. And they have launched a search around roadwork trenches and the rat run of paths that Bruckner used when he lived in the vicinity at the time. There was a desperate bid basically to find some evidence for which he can be charged related to the Maline Macan abduction and murder before he gets released from prison after a conviction for a rape of a tourist in the similar area. Do you think, though, that these resources should still be going into? I mean, huge resources that are still going into the search for Maline.
Well, it's such a high-profile case. I guess it just takes on its own momentum after a while. It's the sort of thing where, because it's been sustained not just by the mystery and the horror of this particular story, but also how long it's taken to establish this primary suspect. How also unfortunately the kind of hucksters and the people wanting to comment on it and pontificate about it, kind of amateur true crime that surrounds it now. I think therefore there's always going to be an interest if there's any kind of scrap of evidence.
I mean, it makes front page news in some newspapers today.
Absolutely. And whether or not that fixation on this story is necessarily helpful is another question.
I mean, there's an argument if this man, and again, he's not been charged with any crime in relation to Maline Macan, if this man is guilty of this crime or is charged with this crime and found guilty, then that is in public interest for this man not to be out on the streets. We already know he's a paedophile. We already know he's a rapist.
And he's due for release in September, I understand. So there's obviously, if you're from the German authorities' perspective, there's a sense that there's a pressing need. If there is even a whiff of evidence here that might actually incriminate him, that of course it would be in the public interest to do so. There's always 2 layers in it. There's the case itself and the clear criminal justice justifications for continuing to look into this, but then there's also, unfortunately, the quite pure interest which has already surrounded it.
Yeah, absolutely.